Good evening, this is Quintus Curtius, and welcome back to the Fortress of the Mind podcast. The subject of tonight's podcast is going to be instinct versus deliberation. And I got the idea to do this podcast from an email that I received a few days ago from a listener who basically is saying, "Hey Quintus, I'm a frequent listener of your podcasts, and I wanted to know what your opinion is of the value of gut instinct as it pertains to goals, women, and other things in life. Instinct versus calculation, or instinct versus reason, instinct versus deliberation." And what he means by that question is instinct a good indicator of reliability on judgments that we make? That's really what he's getting at. That's really what the purpose of the question is. And the more I thought about this question, the more I liked it. I found it to be very profound, actually. The more you think about it, the deeper it gets, and there's layers and layers that can be uncovered when we talk about instinct versus deliberation. And so I thought the best way to discuss this issue was to kind of describe how my thinking first went when I started to think about this. And I think that I was led down the wrong path at first. When I first started to plan what I was going to talk about in the podcast, I was led down the wrong road, and I made a couple mistakes. And I want to share those mistakes with you so you can see what I did wrong and how I think I corrected myself. And then I think finally took up the right path and the right way to look at the subject of instinct. So when he first asked me the question, instinct, I said to myself, okay. Well, it seems reasonable to assume that intuition, I'm going to use intuition and instinct interchangeably, by the way, because they are interchangeable. I think it's reasonable to assume, I first thought, that intuition or instinct grows with experience, and intuition or instinct grows with age. Seems reasonable. The older you get, the more experience you get, the better your instincts are, supposedly, and the better your intuition is. But then I said to myself, after thinking about that for a few minutes, I said, you know what, that's wrong. That's actually not correct. What I was doing wrong was I was confusing instinct. I was confusing intuition with knowledge. And the two things are very, very separate. They're very different. Instinct does not necessarily grow with age. Instinct does not necessarily grow with knowledge. And why is this so? This is so because intuition is fundamentally an irrational impulse. It's a talent. It's not based on reason. It's not based on calculation. It's not based on reasoned thought. And as a talent, it's something that can be cultivated, but it's not necessarily something that we can aggregate to with age and with experience, just in the same way that a good basketball player is always going to have that talent. A good speaker is always going to have that talent. He can do things to improve his talent, but it's the talent itself that can never really be added to or subtracted in any fundamental sense. That's the first step, I think, in analyzing this problem. Intuition and instinct is not based on reason. It's a talent. It's not a skill. It doesn't really get better with age. It doesn't really get better with experience. And one of the things that led me to this conclusion was I remembered, it seems like 100 years ago now, but when I was living in Asia, I would remember that some of the best judges of Japanese calligraphy, the characters are called kanji. In Korean, they're called hanja. They're the Chinese characters that are used in some of the formal writing in those countries. And very often it seemed like the best judges of the quality of calligraphy were children, were people who couldn't even read the characters. And have you ever noticed that? Sometimes people can go to a museum, or sometimes a young child can be a better judge of what's good and what's not good than maybe a seasoned or experienced adult. Not always, but sometimes. Maybe it's true that experience and age actually inhibits our powers of intuition and our powers of instinct. Maybe that's the case. So that's one thing that I noticed. I began to really appreciate that very often the best judges of the quality of something, say art, books, films, are not always the people with the most experience in that topic area. Sometimes it takes the eyes of an outsider. Sometimes it takes the renewed perspective of someone who's standing outside the immediacy of the problem to really understand it. Sometimes you can get so far into the problem that you can't see the forest for the trees. And that's why instinct and first impressions are so important, because they're formed without reliance on reasoned thought. They're formed based on talent. Intuition is a talent, I really think. I think it's a talent in the same way that writing skills are talents, speaking skills are talents, human relation skills are talents, athletic activity and abilities are talents. And if we can see it that way, then we can really begin to understand the differences between knowledge and intuition. We can't confuse the two. Very often they are confused. So then the next question becomes, well, okay, Quintus, that's fine. If intuition is a talent, is there any way that I can improve that talent? Can I exercise some sort of intuition muscle in my head? Is there anything I can do in a practical nature that can increase my powers of intuition, of instinct, of being able to hone those instincts? Is there anything I can do? I think the answer is yes, but with some qualifications. In the same way that someone who is a good chess player can become a great chess player with discipline and practice, I also think that someone who has good instincts and intuitive skills can become a person with great instinct and intuitive skills if they practice. Now, how do you practice? How do you do that? Well, I think you do it in this way. I think you have to expose yourself and surround yourself with the topic to which you are trying to be intuitive about. If you believe that you're intuitive, if you have intuitive skill with human relations, then you need to interact with people a great deal. If you think that you have a great instinct as a writer or as a speaker, you need to write or speak as often as you can. If you think that you have great intuitive athletic ability, then you should be practicing as much as you can. And if you believe that you're a great trumpet player, oboe player, bass player, then it goes without saying that you should be doing those things, exercising that intuition muscle to add to your powers of instinct. Now you could say, well, isn't that just knowledge? Not necessarily. Not necessarily. I think knowledge we can look at maybe as the leaves on the tree, the leaves at the end of the branches. But the branches themselves have to be firm and strong and able to sustain the weight of the lesser branches. And by practicing in our discipline, by disciplining ourselves to do what we're supposed to do, then I think we can increase our powers of instinct along those lines. And I think this finally leads us to the ultimate question, which everyone wants to know, and that is, what is a better judge of things, instinct or deliberation? What's a better judge? Should we rely on our gut instinct about things, or should we instead rely on our our powers of deliberation, which I suppose is the same thing as intellect? Should we go with our first gut impulse about something. Let's say we see an artwork, or we meet a new person, or we see a girl, or we do anything that involves exercising of the intuitive muscle. Should we rely on that gut impulse, or should we instead fall back on our powers of reasoning? And this really is the big question. This is the ultimate payoff. And I think the answer is it depends. The answer is it depends, but I will say this. I think that far too often we don't give our instinct as much credit as we should. All things being equal, I think we should rely on our instincts more than our rational deductive knowledge, all other things being equal. Because I think the instinct speaks to us on a deeper level. It taps into our subconscious. We can rely on our subconscious to see things that we can't see with our eyes or with our senses. It's almost like a sixth sense, you could call instinct. It really is. It's a talent. But the thing is, you can rely on it and you can count on it, but you've got to make sure your instinct is good. If you're a person who doesn't know himself or herself, and you think you have good instincts, I mean, there are many people who think they do, and you don't have good instincts, then you are making a mistake. So it all goes back to the ancient Greek saying, know thyself. And that was the motto that Socrates used to exhort his followers to pay attention to. Know thyself, know yourself. If you take an honest appraisal of your own strengths and weaknesses, and if you really believe that you have good instincts and that your gut instincts are good, then you should follow those when in doubt. All other things being equal, the default rule, go with your instinct. But on the other hand, if you're someone who's not very attuned to his environment, and there are some people that are just, it doesn't mean they're bad, it doesn't mean that they're deficient in some way. There are just some people that just don't pick up on stuff. They're just not very intuitive, for lack of a better word. They're not very instinctive. And as a rule, I think we can say with truth that women tend to be more instinctive and more intuitive than probably men are. Not always, but it seems that women, the old stereotype that women rely on intuition and emotion and those subconscious triggers or keys, I think is true. I think men, the powers of reasoning and deliberation in men in general seem to be more reliable for them than they are for women. Again, these are stereotypes, but I think they have bases in fact, and we can't ignore that. So that's my thoughts. I'll kind of wrap up my thoughts about it. Number one, I think that intuition and instinct is a talent. It's not based on deliberation. It's not based on it's not based on experience, and it's not based on age. And intuition exists independently of age and experience. It truly is a talent. And the second thing I talked about was how we can go about developing that talent. And I think we can go about developing the talents of instinct by involving ourselves in the things that we want to be instinctive or intuitive about. And then the third issue or question that I dealt with was, which is a more reliable judge for us, instinct or deliberation? And my answer to that, in short, was, when in doubt, go with your instinct, but make damn sure that you have decent instincts. And how do you know if you have good instincts or not? You'll know. If your judgments are more often wrong than they are right, then that tells you probably should rely more on your homework than on your gut feeling. But if you're one of those people who has an intuitive grasp of situations or subject matters or topics, then when in doubt, Go with that instinct. That will conclude our podcast here tonight at Fortress of the Mind. It's brought to you courtesy of Fortress of the Mind Productions. I'm Quintus Curtius. Good night.